So once again, thanks for coming this evening. I hope you find this one to be as entertaining and as informational as the last two. I actually think this will be one of the best ones outside of the gold show, which is coming next. So we're going to start. Numbers never lie, right? That's what they always tell us, or do they? And this is really important, especially with what's going on right now with what happened last week in the market. I wasn't planning on that happening. All of this was written actually a month ago. Believe it or not, you're going to be surprised how appropriate it is for what just happened over the last week or whatever. But anyway, perception is 90% of reality. Wall Street, the government, and everybody and their brother uses this. They know this, and they use it for their benefit and usually against our benefit. And what I mean by this, I'm going to give you a real good example here. If you go back 200 years ago when we had slavery, it was perceived that it was okay to own another human being and to treat them as a piece of property, right? Did that make it true? Was it any more true 200 years ago than it is today? The truth never changes. What changes is the perception. So eventually people learn to perceive that, no, that isn't okay, which then they had the right perception, and then that becomes reality. Well, the same thing goes, you could go back further than that. The earth was flat, right? Sure. And everybody believed it to be true because that was the perception. It wasn't actual reality, but it was their reality because they believed it to be. That goes on with us all the time. I'm going to bring it up to modern day here. I'm going to ask you a question. 2%, 3%. Is that a 1% difference or a 50% difference? It's both. It's both, depending on how you perceive it to be. So, I was reading an article once in a magazine, and they were talking about one of these drugs. And they were saying, you know, that if you didn't take the drug, you had a 50% greater chance of dying from whatever the disease was. And so I started to look deeper into it and go, how are they coming up with these numbers? And I went and I actually looked at the numbers. And the numbers were, this is how it came out. If you did not take the drug, then 3% of the people, 3 people out of 100 would die. If you did take the drug, then only 2 people out of 100 would die. So they advertised that you had a 50% greater chance of dying if you didn't take this drug. But in reality, it was only 3 out of 100 instead of 2 out of 100. So let's bring this down to today, right? The coronavirus. And they're telling you don't buy the masks or whatever. And they've already told us, China's told us, that there's about a 2% mortality rate to this. Now, for one thing, we can't believe China because China's not going to tell us the truth because they don't want their economy to go into the, yeah, that's the better word than I was going to use for a description. And so we don't know that we could trust that number. We're going to have to watch and see what happens in South Korea and Italy and Iran, where they're having a lot of cases, and see what their mortality rate is. But nevertheless, let's say they came and told you, you know, that if you don't use a mask, you have a 3% chance of dying. If you do use a mask, you only have a 2% chance of dying. Therefore, you have a 50% better chance of surviving it. Right? No, you don't. But this is the kind of stuff that goes on all the time in the marketing. I think part of my job, to tell the honest truth, is I'm not going to be here forever. Sorry. I'm mortal just like all the rest of you. I'm not going to be here forever. So I think part of my job is also to help teach you guys how to see things the way I see things and think the way I think at times. When I see this kind of stuff, my mind automatically goes to who's saying it, who's paying for it, what's in it for them. You know, I very seldom stop and think that whatever they're telling me is for my benefit. It's usually for their benefit. And so I tend to question, I'm very cynical. I'm getting old and I'm cynical. Shoot, I was cynical when I was young. But I get more cynical. Whenever I see something, I start tearing it apart. So, let's go into the topic for this week, for this month. And like I said, this was all written a couple months ago, actually. Most of it was written over a month ago. The dangers ahead. The causes of recessions and market decline. Now, if you remember back to the first class, we talked about this a little bit, and we said it was when people stop buying or curtail their buying, that's going to cause the recession. So either a lack of confidence or a lack of liquidity is what's going to cause a recession or a major market decline. Well, what happened right now is the lack of confidence, of course, because people are worried about how is all of this going to affect us. And so when the confidence drops, everybody starts becoming afraid and they want out of the market. But it takes one of these two things. And we were already in trouble way before this one came. The lack of liquidity is the one that's actually going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It isn't here yet, but it's coming, and this is what we want to talk about this evening. So one of the things I want to show you, and kind of back to the first part where I was saying you got to watch what they say and everything. If you look at the market downturns, the major market downturns and or recessions, because one of the downturns wasn't very big, but was almost a 2-year recession in there, and you look at what happens with the federal rates. These are the loaning rates, that the Fed says this is the rate we're going to loan money out at. So back in 1973 and 74, we had a couple of really big downturns, minus 17% and minus 29%. So altogether, we lost 47% inside the market. At that point in time, when that whole thing started, the interest rates were up at 13%. So the Feds dropped the rates down to 8% over this time period, and that's what helped bring us back out of that recession, out of that big market downturn. So 5%, okay? 1990, the market was only down 6.56%, but the bond market, I should have put that on here, the bond market was down 27%. And was because of rising interest rates. Okay, so anyway, interest rates had topped out at 8%, and to get everything back into line, the Feds dropped the rates down, and they don't drop it all in one night. I mean, it's half a point, half a point, half a point until they finally get there. They took it down to 3%, and that brought us back out of this recession. So once again, you might notice it's almost exactly 5%. I prefer questions wait to the end if possible.
Okay. As long as you come back to that slide.
I can. The paper didn't go anywhere. Okay, so then we have 2000, 2001, 2002, all the way into 2003. Have you ever heard the explanation of what caused that downturn? I'll give it to you some other day. Anyway, we can tell you. So in 2000 we lost 10%, then 13%, then 23%. So once again it was 46% decrease altogether in the market over that time period. We started out at 6.5% interest rate, and the Feds had to take it down to 1% to get the economy going again. So you may notice 5%, 5%, 5%. In 2008, we lost 38% in the market. Okay, another big downturn. So from 2007, right before January 2008, the interest rates were at 5.25%. How did they get us out of this? They took us all the way down to 0%, and it stayed there this time, which is our biggest mistake ever, all the way till 2015 before they started raising the interest rates again. So currently we are at 1.5%. If we go into another recession or a big market downturn, how much does it take to get the economy to turn around? 5%. How are we going to do that when we're sitting at 1.5%?
Hope we don't go to negative.
And we're going to talk about that. I'm glad you mentioned that word. Because we actually can't. But I want you to see something else. And this is really funny. I had this on and then last week happened. There's a thing called PE ratios. PE stands for price to earnings ratio. So you take a stock, if a stock is, if the stock is making $1 a share and you have a 10 PE, that means the stock is selling for $10 a share. Okay, so it makes $1, that's a 10 PE, and it's for $10 a share. Okay, so during good times, usually it starts out low and then it runs up high. So if you go to 1920, the average PE, price to earnings ratio, was only 5. So a stock, a company that was making $1 a share, would sell the share for $5 a share. Got that? Okay. 1929, right before everything blew apart, the Great Depression, stocks were selling at a 30 PE. 1980, do you remember that? The high inflation years where the market went to hell in a handbasket? Right before that? Okay, so the PE was at 7 times. In 2000, right before the crash, we were at a 40 PE. In 2007, it came down, but only came down to the average, which is supposed to be about 15, 13 to 15 is average. Actually came down to 15. Right now, or as of a week ago anyway, right before all this happened, we were at a 33 PE. I mean, it's almost written in, you know what's coming next. Every time we get up above that 30 mark, something not very good happens to the stock market. So it's really important to see that when things are coming. So why is the market so high right now? It's still high, believe it or not, even though we lost, what, 10, 12% last week, and then it came back 1,000 points today. Don't get too excited either way, actually. We're still really quite high. If you look compared to where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, we're still quite high. So it looked like it was a big drop, and it was a big drop. But it's kind of just a warning signal more than anything else, kind of a shot across the bow. Because how did we get this high? If you remember, we had a new tax law that came into effect, what, 2 years ago, basically. And they gave the corporations about a 41% tax cut, billions of dollars. The average corporation saves something like $78 million, and the average household family saved $1,000. Is how this thing has worked so far. So they were supposed to take that money and they were supposed to put it back into our economy. They were supposed to give their workers raises, they were supposed to buy new machinery, they were supposed to invest into their companies and make more money with that money. What did they do with that money? None of those things, I'll guarantee you. What they did with that money is they started buying back their own stocks instead. 60% of all of the trading on the stock market over the last few years, this has gone on for 3-4 years now, especially since they got all the extra cash from the tax breaks, 60% of all the buying on the stock market is corporations buying their own stock back. If we didn't have that going on right now, we wouldn't be up at these crazy levels, because the more people you have trying to buy stock, the higher the price of the stock goes. So that's what's been going on. The other thing is the low interest rates. So you have normal people like you and me. Well, you guys are normal. We know I'm not. That's right. Been normal since I was born. It's boring to be normal. So the low interest rates, that's keeping everybody in the stock market. Who wants to go put their money in a bank earning 0.8% of interest, right? And we have all the baby boomers. That's coming up next, and they're. Some of us have gotten to retirement age, the others are just coming up on it, and they're the ones who are putting all that money into 401ks and stuff, and so they got to put their money somewhere, and they're sure as heck not going to put it into an interest-bearing account right now because they can't make anything there, and they're afraid they're going to get left in the dust, and so they're putting all this money in the market. And this is what happened, in 1999, when they reversed the Glass-Steagall Act. That was a terrible, terrible mistake in this country, almost as bad as this last tax cut. Because they used to say, here's the Wall Street banks, here's the Main Street banks. They cannot be one and the same. And in 1999, the banks convinced Congress that they'd be okay if it was one and the same again, which is the way it happened right before the Great Depression in 1930. So that's when the Glass-Steagall Act came in 1932. So they got rid of the act, and now all your big banks, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, they're all Wall Street banks. Well, they don't want the money in savings accounts. They want that money in Wall Street where they can manipulate it and make a whole lot more money. So they're the ones who have kept these interest rates low. Those interest rates should have started rising way back in 2012. We should have been back at 5 and 6%. As you well know, just 2 years ago, they tried to move it just up to 2%. The market started to decline. The politicians, Wall Street goes, no, we can't do this. What they do, they started taking the interest rates back down again. So all this has been fake. It's all built, it's a house of cards that's about to fall apart. Any little excuse, like a coronavirus, which used to be a beer, but
Yeah.
And they
then
renamed,
everybody wanted Corona.
they renamed that Ebola.
Yeah. Ebola beer? Oh. So, anyway, any little excuse like that is enough to terribly tumble the market, and it's only because the market's looking for an excuse almost to fall, because it's up at unrealistic heights to start with. So, confidence and liquidity. So if the people stop buying into the market, it's going to come down, right? Once you take the buying pressure out. So if the people lose the confidence or they're afraid, they stop putting money into the market, and it just starts to snowball. Everything starts to snowball, going back in the opposite direction. Well, along with that, like I said, confidence, one of the other things, and this just came up, it was on the news again last night, I can't believe it. The CCPI, I know we talked about this a little bit on one of the other videos, not in person, but I wanted to cover it tonight. This is another way the government's coming back at us. So after they gave the great tax cut to the corporations, which was dang nice of them, and not very much to us, what they did is they actually found a way to make it look like they're giving us something, but found a way to take it back right coming out of the gate. The CPI is called the Consumer Price Index. This is how they adjust for inflation. So one of the things that they adjust with inflation is the standard deduction. So they gave us this great big standard deduction, right? We went from 12,000 to 24,000. That's very nice of them. Well, this last year, the standard deduction went up from 12,000 to 12,600, whatever it is. That's a 1.6% increase, whereas inflation was actually 2.1%. But they're saying, no, inflation was only 1.6. It's because now they're using the CPI. So this is called a chain consumer price index. What it does is it assumes that once prices get too high, people will change their buying habits and therefore buy something cheaper. For instance, you buy Pepsodent toothpaste and it goes up from $2 to $2.20, 10% jump, okay? Well, they assume that, well, because that went up that high, you'll turn around and switch to a generic toothpaste, which only went up to $2.05 from $1.80, right? And so now they use the $2.05 instead of the $2.20, and so now they only have to show that inflation only went up by 2% instead of by 10%. So now they're talking, and this I just saw last night on YouTube. I already knew that part was going on, the part about the tax, how they're going to come back to us. Oh, so, sorry, I almost forgot that. So how does that play in their favor? Well, because our standard deduction is going up slower than inflation, it's going to throw us into the higher tax brackets faster. And so now we end up paying more tax rather than less tax, because we don't get to write off as much as we used to write off percentage-wise. So now they're talking about tying this into other things, such as Social Security, but the one last night was about Medicaid. If they could get this on Medicaid, they'll have fewer people qualifying for Medicaid, for one, for welfare, for two, and so it's going to take people who are just barely borderline anyway, it's going to throw them out of the welfare system, but they're too broke to even buy food half the time. And so that's how, dear old Donald, he's saying, you know, we're taking all these people off of welfare. Well, this is part of how he's taking them off of welfare, is they're not any better off than they were. We just changed the math. And now, all of a sudden, oh, well, you're not as poor as you used to be. You're not making any more money, but you're not as poor as you used to be. What a crock of crap. You know, that's pissed me off to know.
Hear, hear.
So now they've tried it a couple times, and they're going to try it again, and they're going to probably keep trying it until they get it. The same thing's going to go with Social Security, because right now we have a cost of living increase that is figured out with the CPI. They've talked about it several times, and they're going to bring it in. You just wait, you watch. They're going to bring it in with the CCPI. So now they not only get us to pay more taxes because we're creeping up faster and faster, we're going to get lower and lower raises, because they're going to say, no, that's not the true inflation. This is your inflation rate. And we all know. I mean, the government's been telling us for years that we have basically no inflation, right? Is there anybody in this room who spends less at a grocery store now than they did a year or two ago? No. But what they do? Oh, food's too volatile. We just take that out of the mix. Right? That's the crap they've been doing to us for years. Why is China buying gold? this is why you want to come to the gold meeting 2 months from now. But I'm going to give you a real brief taste of this, because this is another one of these, the dangers ahead, for sure. So it's been rumored for quite some time that China's buying a lot of gold, a lot of gold. They still report that they only have 1.8 tons of gold, whereas the United States has like 8 tons of gold, and we're supposed to be the richest and the biggest of all of them. But there's a lot of rumors out there. There's a lot of substantiated rumors that China has actually somewhere between 10 and 20 tons of gold right now. They've been buying it. They are the #1 producing gold country in the world now. That just happened last year. Up until then was Australia, India. There's several that have been bouncing back and forth. South Africa. Anyway, now China is, and so not only are they producing the most, but they buy the most, and they encourage their people to buy a lot of gold. So it's not all just in their central banks. One of the rumors is, and this one actually totally makes sense, right now none of the dollars that are out there, I don't care what you call them, rupees or francs or Deutschmarks or whatever you call them, I'm going to call them dollars just generically here, it's all what's called fiat currency now. That doesn't mean it drives around a little Ford car. It's fiat means, the word is Latin and means let it be so. So what it is, it's because the government says this is a dollar, it's a dollar. Okay, that's why it's called fiat currency. It's not backed by anything. We haven't had a gold-backed dollar since 1971. Nobody has. So anyway, the rumor is China's going to back their dollar with gold. If that were to happen, that's a major, major problem for us. All oil in the entire world is traded on the US dollar right now. Which would you rather have? The promise from the United States government or a dollar backed by gold? I'd take the dollar backed by gold. So will a lot of the other countries. Once they know that they could trade basically in gold instead of US dollars, that's going to knock us way down. If that knocks us way down, who wants to hold US dollars anymore? Nobody. They're going to flood our market trying to get us to take all our dollars back. What happens when you flood the market?
Value of it goes.
Right. Hence inflation. I told all you guys who were there over a year ago, the meeting that we had at the museum in January of over a year ago, I said, watch, inflation is coming. It has to come. It's just the way things are lining up, it's coming. And here it comes. That would cause such massive inflation. It'll make 1980-81 look quite tame, actually. Okay, negative interest rates. So why would anybody do negative interest rates? Does everybody understand about what negative interest rates are? No. Okay, so it means basically when you borrow money, they're going to pay you for borrowing the money. If you try to save money, they're going to charge you for putting money into your savings account. Now, which of those two scenarios that I just told you do you think will actually trickle down to the consumer? You think they're going to pay you when you borrow money?
No.
Oh, hell no.
Corporations, yes.
Corporations, yes. Governments, yes. Us individuals, absolutely not. But do you think they'll charge you to put money into your savings account?
Yep.
Absolutely. That's how they make their money. So why would anybody do that, though? What? They want to stimulate the growth. Because this whole thing has been such a farce and such a fake ever since 2007 and 2008, we've never truly recovered. All the governments just start printing money. And that's how they just keep doing this and doing this. And we're not getting anywhere. We haven't gotten anywhere in 10 years. Everything that's happened is pretty much, shoot, I hate to use this, I really hate to use this phrase, fake news. It's not quite that bad, but it basically is, because it's all because it's been printed money. So what they're doing is they're trying to stimulate their growth. So what they say is, they'll go to the big banks, they'll say, if you'll loan out money to the businesses so that they'll grow more, then our economy will be better, and this is going to work. So we're going to not only give you the money to loan to the businesses, we're going to pay you to take this money and make sure you loan it to the businesses. But if the businesses don't need it, like one of the countries, Denmark, Sweden, either one of them, they have a very slow growth rate population-wise. So just for example, they're not building a lot of new houses because they don't have a whole lot of new people to take up new houses. What's really wrong with just staying even keel? Why does there have to be inflation? Why do we always have to be growing? It's this concept that they've gotten into their head that this is the way it's supposed to be and it's always going to be. And if it's not happening, it's bad. To me, I don't quite get that. If you don't need more new houses, why are we building new houses? Just to keep those people employed? Give them something else to do. I'm sure there's another need somewhere along the way. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of countries who are already doing this negative interest rate stuff. This is the list of them: Japan, Sweden, Brazil, Denmark, Switzerland, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the European Central Bank, which is basically Germany. Okay? And this is what they're doing, and Trump wants to take us there. He's bargaining at the feds to do this. It's a dark hole that we do not want to go into. Japan's actually been doing this since the 90s, and look at where they're at. They've been stuck there ever since. Once you get into that hole, it's almost impossible to get out of it. So we have to find a way to actually start paying down the debt. Okay, so like I said, the loans, they might say, and like in Denmark, they actually do have some mortgages, home mortgages that are in negative interest rates. But what they don't tell you is the amount of fees that they charge instead. How's the bank going to stay in business? If they're paying you, somehow they got to bring money in, right? And so it's going to be the fees that they charge you for having the loan and the fees that they're going to charge you for putting your money in the bank. We're almost there now, to tell the honest truth. If you look at city charge cards, if you go and spend your money on a city card, they will pay you 1% for spending it, and one of their cards will pay you another 1% when you pay it. Guess how much they pay you when you put money into their savings account? 0.3%. Is that not basically? They'll pay you to use your charge card, but they won't pay you to save your money. That's kind of where we're going. So, yeah, watch it. Once again, we're going to have some alternatives as far as. So, here we go. Does anybody know what this is?
Pyramid.
Thank you.
Yay.
Good job.
Thanks. I do not draw well. I apologize, but I was like, oh my god.
Well, I did the outline. I said, go fill it in for me. You know, and who built the pyramids?
Egyptians.
Egyptians. And what did the Egyptians figure out thousands of years ago about grain? During the good times, you put some away for the bad times, right? Wasn't that them who came up with that concept? Right? Okay, so we're going through supposedly the greatest recovery this nation has ever seen in the stock market. If that is true, why didn't interest rates go back up? Why didn't the deficit go down? Why are we borrowing more and more money? Why did we not learn the lesson that during the good times you're supposed to put money away so that you have it during the bad times? Because I'll guarantee you bad times are coming again. And we don't have even 5% to mess with anymore, as we stated way back at the beginning of this program tonight. Where's that going to come from? We should have learned this lesson. We should have learned this lesson and we should be following it. Our leaders aren't too bright. They say, has anybody ever heard of Edward Lorenz before? The butterfly effect?
Butterfly flaps his wing in China, it'll cause a hurricane, or actually in Egypt or something.
Yeah,
cause a hurricane.
The actual title of the paper they wrote is, if a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, will it cause a tornado in Texas?
Yeah.
But, I won't tell you the whole story, but you should go read it. Go Wikipedia it. Wiki's really cool. You can learn all kinds of stuff on there. But what it was is the scientist was measuring weather, and he only took it to 3 decimal places. He put in this formula, he only took 3 decimal places. And the original formula had 6 decimal places. He let it run for a couple hours, he comes back. For the first couple of days, it was only off by a little bit from what his first projection was, but within a month, they didn't even resemble each other hardly. And he found out that one small itty-bitty difference makes a huge difference after it compounds on. My point is, you look at what just happened with the coronavirus in China. They're saying, oh, this is just a blip. I heard this right before we started, somebody saying, well, this is just a blip, don't worry about it, just ride through these things. China employees missed a couple weeks of work. Most of the country missed a couple weeks of work. Their car sales are down by 90% for the month of February. Do you not think that this has hurt their economy, and fairly seriously? But how does that affect us? Not by much. Oh, that's who's missing tonight. I have a client, he works in Boulder, and a lot of the contract work that they do depends on materials coming in from China. And right now they're not getting those materials because half of China is shut down at the moment. So the butterfly is in China right now, to tell the honest truth. Remember all the way back, one person's spending is another person's income, right? Well, if they have less money to spend, that's going to affect. Now, remember in the very first one, I said this is actually wrong because one person's spending is many people's income. Remember we went through the farmer and the truck driver and all of that? Well, that's what's going on now. So if you think that this stock market adjustment over last week and this week is over, you're seriously mistaken. This is just the start of it. 6 months from now, look at the airlines. How many airline flights have been canceled? How many people are afraid to get on the airlines? If this hits this country, I don't know about you guys, but every time I fly somewhere, I come back with a freaking cold. It's just like clockwork almost. And a lot of people say that. If this hits in this country, remember what happened with the airlines after 9/11? How bad that one hurt? And that's, now we're shipping people, we're shipping products, it's just going to snowball, could snowball into something quite significant. On the other hand, maybe it is just, it's going to run its course and it's going to be over with in a couple of weeks. But even if that were to happen, the damage, and this is what I said earlier before we started the meeting, I said to somebody, most of the damage has already been done, and now it's going to be the trickle effect. It's going to be the butterfly in Brazil. All those little things, it's going to change what would have been if that had never happened. So I'm pretty convinced if we do get a bounce back, and this is just my humble opinion, I'm not telling anybody to buy or to sell in or out of the stock market. My humble opinion is if this thing bounces back anywhere near close to where the highs were a week ago, that's a good time to sell because within 6 months, this trickle-down effect is going to start happening, and we're in for a pretty decent downturn. On the other hand, you might want to be buying into a couple certain things like gold and silver to a certain extent. You might ask, I don't know if any of you will, so I'll throw it in here right now. Why did gold go down so bad last week along with the stock market? Anybody wonder that? Since gold's supposed to shoot up when the market's going down? Yeah? Anybody have any guesses why that happened? It's what's called margin calls. If you have a whole lot of money that you're betting on the